Roseanne promised the diehards, and here you are. I'm Joan Lipkin. I am delighted to be here and share a few minutes with you. The title of my talk tonight is Why Bayard Rustin Just Might Be the Most Important Man You Have Never Heard of. I think this is an appropriate topic for our conference because Rustin described his methodology as, quote, social dislocation and creative trouble, unquote. And that seems very much like the work that we are doing here as artists, activists, administrators, and urban planners at this conference, regardless of your religious affiliation. Can I get an amen, please? So welcome to a taste of Bayard Rustin. Bayard was a Quaker, so in the tradition of Quakers, I'm going to start over. As the Quakers do, I say, hello, friends.
Hello.
That's very sleepy Quakers. Hello, friends.
Hello,
friends. Very good. And it is also part of the Quaker tradition to sit in community and in silence. How many of you are familiar with the Quakers? Yeah. Okay, so you know that Quakers believe that a divine force speaks to and through them. And so they usually wait until what they describe as a divine light, and then they speak. So you can actually be at a Quaker meeting and no one will speak for a long time, usually like a question and answer at a conference, right? However, it can be a very refreshing and deeply restorative shared silence. But here, however, my rambunctious Eastern European Jewish self will depart. I have no patience tonight for silence, especially when there's much to say and much urgency in Bayard's message. March 17th, St. Patrick's Day, would have been Bayard's 100th birthday. How many of you know of Bayard Rustin? Okay, so Rustin was an extraordinary figure. He was a Renaissance man, and quite a handsome man, actually, raised by his grandparents in Westchester, Pennsylvania. A football player in high school who used to recite sonnets when he knocked down his opponents. A tenor whose voice was so beautiful that after graduating from college, which he attended on a music scholarship, he toured with a music group called Josh White and the Carolinians and actually recorded albums. And he became a friend and disciple of Mahatma Gandhi and is the person who is primarily credited with bringing the principles of nonviolence to the US. He was known for many things: as a labor organizer, an anti-violence activist, and the primary organizer of the historic 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, the largest march that this nation had ever known. More than 200,000 people went to that march, back in a time when there was no internet, no cell phones, at best a Xerox machine, and probably the best community organizer of all time besides Christ. His name was Bayard Rustin. This march was the site of Dr. Martin Luther King's iconic "I Have a Dream" speech, which catapulted King to the center of the civil rights movement. According to his biographer, John D'Amelio, Bayard Rustin's life and the breadth of his involvements demonstrated how we might build movements and bring about social change. So, raise your hands again if you've heard from him, if you know of him. Okay, so then the question remains, and I'm going to give you this question: why have most of us probably not heard of him? You haven't heard of him because this is also a story about racism and homophobia. Rustin was also gay. Back in a time when it was still considered a psychiatric disorder, it was actually not removed from the books as a psychiatric disorder until 1973. So this was back in a time when there wasn't, and there still is not, many places where people are protected from discrimination for sexual orientation. So this talented young man, poetry reciting, singing, football playing Quaker, faced multiple discriminations as a gay man and as an African American. In 1953, Rustin was arrested on a morals charge for allegedly having sex in a car with 2 men in Pasadena, California. He spent 60 days in jail, and this arrest would shadow his life and his activism for years. When he was an advisor to Martin Luther King Jr., they planned a demonstration for the 1960 Los Angeles Democratic National Convention. And when Harlem Congressman Adam Clayton Powell heard about this, he blackmailed King to cancel the action, threatening to reveal that King and Rustin were having an affair. Now, King was many things, but a homosexual is not one of them, right? We know that. So King, fearing the worst, let Rustin go, even though there was no truth behind the allegations. And in many ways, this story would sort of dog his work, Rustin's work. So I want to talk just a moment more about how I feel that homophobia informs history that you may or may not know, because this really does speak to all of us, and we are all implicated in some way. Rustin was deeply ashamed of the arrest. In many ways, he was a private man who believed that sexual orientation is a private matter. However, he was essentially forced out of the closet when he was arrested. And in years to come, he despaired about how this would affected his effectiveness. So you might say, why would such a smart man do such a foolish thing? To which I would say, is sexuality and its expression not a normal fact of life? And where was Bayard Rustin to go for intimate connections at a time when there was segregation, right? Where was he supposed to go? So he was arrested, and he spent 2 months in jail. And true to the community organizer that he was, he organized while he was in jail about the conditions of prisoners. He was actually jailed or arrested many, many times in his life, 25 or more. During World War II, when he refused to go into the army, he was convicted of violating the Selective Service Act, and he was jailed. Now, he could have had an out as a Quaker, and that would have been seen as legitimate by the US government on the grounds of religious belief. But he thought that would have been unfair to other people who did not have the same protection. So he was jailed in the Lewisburg Penitentiary for 2 years, between 1944 and 1946. And wouldn't you know, while he was in jail, this community organizer organized against the segregated dining facilities and on behalf of a free India. He was arrested again in 1947, and you don't know these things. And I am not happy he was jailed, but I'm very happy to be able to share this story with you. He was jailed in Roxborough, North Carolina. As a member of CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality, organized by the Quaker Fellowship of Reconciliation, he went on a bus throughout the South to test and draw attention to the recent Supreme Court ruling that segregation of public interstate buses was unconstitutional. He was arrested for riding a bus, and he spent 3 weeks in jail. Now, I think that the thing that strikes me so deeply about Bayard Rustin was how he was so deeply thoughtful about the way he approached his life. When he was arrested and put in on a chain gang in North Carolina, he wrote an article called 22 Days on a Chain Gang that detailed the horrendous practices in jail, including hanging prisoners by their hands. The article drew so much attention that the governor instigated hearings that eventually abolished chain gangs and promoted prison reform in North Carolina. He worked for economic and racial justice. He forged alliances and coalitions. He understood that without economic opportunity, there can be no racial justice. And in a time when we, our collective body, is challenged by so much misogyny and homophobia, xenophobia, and political infighting, he offers us the idea, the hope, that everything is an opportunity for a lesson and a change. I am almost finished. I'm going to end with a story. In 1942, Bayard was on a bus on its way from Louisville to Nashville and sitting next to a white man. The police came and told him he had to move. He said, "I cannot move." And he pointed to a little white child across the aisle saying, "I have done nothing wrong. If I move, this child will not know that an injustice is taking place." And he was forcibly removed from the bus, and the police began to beat him. And then several of the white passengers, strangers, protested the beating, and the beating stopped. I am stunned by the courage of this man, by this one little story that seems emblematic to much of his life. He realized, as we must do, the responsibility to do the right thing, to be an example for all generations, and to use the best tools that we have, our bodies, our speech, to do it in a nonviolent way. In risking so much, he touched the essentially empathetic capacity that all human beings have. He did this despite being maligned as a black man, as a gay man. I hold on to his message. He used to say, every community needs a band of angelic troublemakers. As we go about our lives as artists and activists and administrators, I hope that you will join me in that band. Thank you.